Of all the things Odysseus wants, the deepest is not a ship or a meal or even Ithaca. It is to hear his own name spoken by strangers, to know that what he did at Troy is still told in a world that has not seen him for 20 years. Over 2 books of the Odyssey, that hunger is fed, and then it turns on him. This is the story of a song that gives a man back his name, and of the moment he throws that name away. It runs from the entertainment the Phaeacians lay on for a guest who will not say who he is, to the first of the wanderings he finally tells in his own voice. It begins in the mist, on the road to a palace. Guided by Athena, Odysseus walks from the riverbank toward the palace of Nausicaa's parents, Alcinous and Arete, to ask for their help. The goddess wraps him in a mist so that he passes through the Phaeacian city entirely unseen, and she herself takes the shape of a young girl to lead him to the royal house. As they walk, she explains Phaeacian society to him, and she stresses one point above all, the standing of Queen Arete. Odysseus is to make his appeal to the queen, not to the king. It is the same instruction Nausicaa had already given him on the shore: speak first to my mother and ask her for help. Athena adds that among the Phaeacians, Arete is held in reverence almost equal to that of a god, and that she settles disputes even among men. She is an unusually powerful woman. Odysseus takes the point, and he keeps her power in mind through everything that follows in the royal house. Inside the palace, Athena lifts the mist and vanishes. Suddenly a stranger stands visible in the middle of the hall before the king and the queen. Following the advice of goddess and the princess alike, Odysseus goes straight to Arete, clasps her knees, and asks for her help. Arete receives him cordially, and she promises everything he needs: a meal, a place to sleep, all the standard obligations of Scheria, the sacred code of hospitality, and beyond them, a ship to carry him home to Ithaca. At last, Odysseus has reached a people who will not merely shelter him, but convey him to his own land, complete with an escort. The Phaeacians take pride in this. Hospitality to any shipwrecked wanderer, passage home for any traveler who needs it. These are the things their society does best. And while the ship is prepared, they entertain their nameless guest royally on Scheria. Book 8 of the Odyssey is given over to that entertainment, and it takes 2 main forms: a display of athletic games and the songs of the bard Demodocus, who performs 3 times before Odysseus and the assembled Phaeacians. In the text, the 2 are interleaved: a song, then games, then another song. Each repays separate attention. Take the games first. They display Odysseus in his older role, the warrior of the Iliad. The connection is not obvious to a modern reader, but in the world of Homeric epic, athletics have everything to do with fighting. These are not sports pursued for their own sake, for entertainment or exercise. They are practice for battle. In Book 23 of the Iliad, Achilles honors his dead friend Patroclus with funeral games, and the events chosen there are precisely the maneuvers a soldier needs on the battlefield: chariot racing, throwing the spear, throwing the discus, foot racing. Athletic competition is a stylized rehearsal for war. That is why one exchange during the Phaeacian games cuts so deeply. Laodamas, the son of Alcinous, invites Odysseus to compete. Odysseus declines, and a young Phaeacian named Euryalus tells him he is not surprised because Odysseus does not look like an athlete. The remark makes Odysseus furious. To tell a man he does not resemble an athlete is to tell him he does not resemble a warrior, a fighting man, a soldier. And that is an insult this particular guest cannot let stand. Up to this point, he has not told the Phaeacians who he is. After his meal, when his needs had been attended to, Arete asked his identity. He described his captivity on Calypso's island, and withheld his name. Now, stung by Euryalus, he reacts twice over. First, the body answers. He seizes a discus and hurls it farther than anyone who has competed so far. One throw, and the question of whether this stranger is an athlete is closed. Then the voice follows. He declares that he excelled at every form of warfare, and he narrows the boast to archery. When the Achaeans were fighting at Troy, he says, he was second best with the bow. Only Philoctetes surpassed him. Any listener who knows the story of the Trojan War will recognize from that claim exactly who is speaking. Obliquely but unmistakably, Odysseus has given away his identity. It is one of the very few moments in the whole poem in which he yields to emotion and lets slip something he meant to hold back. As entertainment then, the games are not an unqualified success. They leave the guest of honor insulted and aggrieved, and they leave his hosts closer than they know to the answer they have been waiting for. The songs of Demodocus succeed better, at least on the surface, and they matter enormously for the poem's structure. They carry the audience from the earlier books toward Odysseus' own account of his wanderings, and all three restate crucial themes of the Trojan War story, looking back to the warrior of the Iliad, not forward to the man sailing home. The first song tells of a quarrel between Odysseus and Achilles while the Greeks were at Troy, and here the poem hands classical scholars a genuine puzzle, because this is the only reference to such a quarrel anywhere in surviving ancient Greek literature. Two explanations are possible. Either the composer of the Odyssey invented the episode outright, deciding for his own reasons that Demodocus would sing of a quarrel between the two heroes, or the quarrel was treated elsewhere in ancient literature that has simply not come down to us. This is a recurring problem in classical studies. When something appears only once in the material we possess, it is often impossible to know whether it was genuinely rare or whether the accidents of survival have left us a single trace of something once common. In the song itself, Agamemnon rejoices to see the two best of the Achaeans quarreling, because he remembers a prophecy that Troy would fall soon after the best of the Achaeans fell out with one another. A quarrel among his greatest men means the war is nearly won. Notice what that confirms about Odysseus' rank. Achilles was the greatest warrior of the Greeks, and Ajax the Greater, the second greatest in sheer physical prowess, while Odysseus was the cleverest. But if Agamemnon watches Achilles and Odysseus quarrel and thinks of a prophecy about the best of the Achaeans, then Odysseus is being counted among the two best. The song proves something else. To Odysseus and to us, the Phaeacians know the Trojan War story, and they know the name Odysseus. The fame he is starving for exists, here at the far edge of the world. The second song recounts the love affair between Ares, god of war, and Aphrodite, goddess of sexual passion. At first glance, it seems remote from the concerns of the Odyssey or the Trojan War. The connections are close, the affair is adulterous. Ares is unmarried, but Aphrodite in this poem is the wife of the smith god Hephaestus. On one level, the song picks up the poem's persistent secondary plot, the possibility of a wife proving unfaithful during her husband's long absence, and Odysseus' own fear that Penelope may not have waited. On another level, it recalls the origin of the Trojan War itself, when Paris and Helen conducted a comparable adulterous affair at Aphrodite's prompting and set the whole war in motion. And there is a detail about where this song is performed. It comes after Euryalus' insult, out on the field where the Phaeacian men are competing, with no women present. The other two songs are sung in the palace, where Arete and perhaps other women are listening. It may be that this somewhat risque story, gods caught in bed by the other gods, was considered suitable for a male audience, but not for a mixed one. What Homer's own audience actually consisted of, male, female, or mixed, is one of the many things about these poems we simply do not know. The third song near the end of Book 8 is different. It is sung at Odysseus' specific request. The day is over. The games are finished. The Phaeacians and their guests sit at the evening meal, and Odysseus cuts a choice piece of meat and sends it across the room to the bard as a gift. Then he asks Demodocus to sing of the Trojan Horse, the horse he says that great Odysseus contrived, and he promises that if the bard sings it properly, he will tell everyone that Demodocus is among the greatest singers who ever lived. Demodocus sings the story in exquisite detail, and as he sings, Odysseus, the man who contrived the horse, begins to weep. The weeping is described through one of the most memorable similes in the poem. Odysseus melts, and the tears run down and drench his cheeks, as a woman weeps, flung over the body of her husband, who has fallen fighting before his city and his people, trying to beat off the pitiless day from his home and his children. She watches him dying, gasping for breath, and clings to his body, crying out high and shrill, while behind her the enemy soldiers strike her back and shoulders with the butts of their spears, force her to her feet, and lead her away into slavery, to hard labor and grief. Her cheeks, the poet says, are wasted with pitiful weeping. Such were the pitiful tears that Odysseus shed. The comparison is remarkable because of what it inevitably calls to mind. Demodocus has just sung of the Trojan Horse, the stratagem that accomplished the sack of Troy. And the poet immediately likens Odysseus's tears to those of a woman whose city is being sacked. No other sack can be meant. Odysseus, weeping at the song, is compared to the weeping of his own victims, the victims of his own device, at the moment Troy falls. It is an extraordinary technique for holding both sides of the story in view at once. From the Greek point of view, the horse was a magnificent stroke of genius that won the war. From the Trojan point of view, it was catastrophe. The Iliad does this through Hector, through Andromache, through Priam. Here, a single simile does it in 9 lines. It makes the audience count what the Greek victory cost the people who lost. Why he is crying is a natural question, and grief for the Trojans is unlikely to be the answer. The more persuasive explanation is relief. Since the end of the war, held captive by Calypso, Odysseus has been effectively dead to the world. Had he asked for the song of the Trojan horse and been met with puzzlement, or had the bard credited the stratagem to someone else, he would have learned that his Kleos, his fame and reputation, had not survived his absence. Demodocus' song tells him the opposite. His Kleos is intact. His most memorable exploit is still known, still sung in a place he has never been. He weeps because he still exists. The placement of this song matters too. If, as many scholars believe, the Iliad and the Odyssey were designed for performance over 3 days, this point falls at roughly the end of the first day, and it makes a superb stopping place. The bard Demodocus receives more attention here than any bard anywhere else in either epic. It is the fullest portrait of the profession that Homeric poetry offers, affectionate and admiring, and it arrives precisely where a performing bard would be finishing his own first day before a live audience. Odysseus even sends Demodocus what amounts to a tip, the best cut from the roast pig, as recompense for his skill. It looks very like a poet preparing to pass the hat, while reminding his listeners what a fine thing a good bard is. The dramatic situation is equally well suited to a pause. Odysseus stands on the verge of revealing his identity, of telling his own story, of being sent home. No audience will walk away at such a point without returning for the second day. And on the second day, the guest speaks. As Book 9 opens, Odysseus praises Demodocus once more, and then at last introduces himself. Alcinous has seen him weeping and asked why the songs of Troy should move him so. By now, Odysseus has ample proof that the Phaeacians are trustworthy, that they will give him gifts and send him on his way. What remains is to charm them, to impress them, to overwhelm them with the substance and the style of his story so completely that they will load him with the finest guest gifts imaginable and speed his departure. So he begins his own first-person narrative by telling them what some of them must already have guessed. He is Odysseus, son of Laertes, and his Kleos, he says it himself, reaches the sky. Before he heard the third song, he could not have made that claim, and the words underline a shift in the meaning of kleos between the two poems. In the Iliad, imperishable fame matters because it lives on after the warrior has died. In the Odyssey, kleos matters just as much, but the living Odysseus is preoccupied with his reputation while he is still alive. With what people say about him now, not only with what they will say once he is gone. The self-introduction begins a 4-book stretch of first-person narrative from Book 9 through Book 12, often called the Great Wanderings. In it, Odysseus recounts his adventures in his own voice, from his departure from Troy to his arrival on Calypso's island, where he was held for 7 years. These books contain the most famous episodes in the poem: the monsters, the sorceresses, the enchantresses. They are also a technical tour de force. Sustaining a narration in a character's voice for 4 books of performance time is no small feat, and the poet never loses control of what his narrator can and cannot know. Odysseus never reports anything that would require the external narrator's vantage point. Everything he relates is something he could have seen or learned. He begins with the Greek departure from Troy. The first episodes are ordinary acts of warfare, sacking one last city allied to the Trojans, taking a little additional plunder before heading home. Then Zeus sends a storm that drives the ships off course, and the narrative leaves the everyday world for the realm of marvels, where every adventure threatens Odysseus and his companions with destruction. The first genuinely strange encounter is with the Lotus Eaters, and it is unusual among Odysseus's adventures in appearing benign. These people are friendly and peaceful. All they do is offer their visitors the flowers of the lotus plant. But eating the flowers brings forgetfulness, pleasure, and drowsiness, leaving a man wanting nothing more than to lie under a tree and dream the day away. It is a pleasant danger, and a real one. Many of the men lose all desire to leave, wanting to stay and eat lotus forever rather than return to Ithaca. Odysseus has to drag them back to the ships by force. The next adventure is anything but benign. The encounter with the Cyclops Polyphemus, the one-eyed giant who kills and eats 6 of Odysseus's men and threatens to devour the rest, is probably the most famous episode in the poem, and certainly among the most important. It shows Odysseus at his most quick-witted, and it sets in motion every misfortune that follows. Above all, the episode is a study in negative xenia, hospitality as it ought not to work, violated and ignored. Before exploring the Cyclops' island, Odysseus leaves 11 of his 12 ships moored at a nearby island and sails on with his own ship and its crew to find out who lives there. The words he chooses matter. He goes, he says, to learn what sort of people these are, whether they are savage and violent and without justice or hospitable to strangers, with minds that are godly. These are precisely the words he had used when he awoke on Scheria, roused by Nausicaa and her attendants when their ball landed in the river. The question is the same, and the repetition is the signal. Hospitality is being equated with civilization itself. On Scheria, the answer was the best xenia imaginable. On the island of Polyphemus, it is the exact opposite. Polyphemus observes none of the protocols of hospitality. Rather than giving his guests a meal, he makes his guests into his meal, killing and eating 2 of the men at once, and announcing that he will take another 2 for breakfast and another 2 for supper, until none are left. Trapped, Odysseus is at his cleverest. He must find a way out, and it must be a way that does not involve killing the Cyclops. The giant has rolled a boulder across the mouth of the cave. With Polyphemus dead, Odysseus and his men will be sealed inside to starve beside the body. What he needs is a scheme that disables the Cyclops without killing him, so that when the stone is next moved, the men can slip out unnoticed. The obvious solution is blinding. He gets Polyphemus drunk and drives out his eye while the giant sleeps off the wine. But before that, he does something stranger. He tells Polyphemus that his name is Utis. a Greek name that sounds almost exactly like the Greek word for nobody. The detail seems like a joke. It is the essential part of the plan. When Polyphemus wakes, blinded and screaming, he calls out to his neighbors, one Cyclops, several Cyclops, for help, and the others call back to ask who is hurting him. He answers that nobody is hurting him, so they conclude that his suffering must be a disease sent by the gods, and they advise him to pray to his father, Poseidon, god of the sea. The trick works on two prongs at once: blind the giant and make sure that his cry for help cannot be understood. For one night, the man who lives for his name is saved by having none. The escape follows. Polyphemus rolls the stone away to let his flock out to graze, and Odysseus and his companions cling to the bellies of the sheep. The blind Cyclops runs his hands over the animals' backs as they pass, and never discovers the man beneath them. At this point, Odysseus ought to be free and clear. And yet it is this episode that generates all his later suffering, because once aboard ship, he cannot resist calling back. Whether he does it to secure his Cleos or because he gives way in that instant to excessive pride, both readings are defensible. He shouts to the Cyclops across the water, "If any mortal ever asks who inflicted this shameful blinding on your eye, tell him you were blinded by Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes, whose home is in Ithaca." Handing over his name hands Polyphemus the power to curse him by it. The giant lifts his ruined face to the sky and calls on his father Poseidon, and he prays that Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes, may never reach his home. And if it is fated that he shall see his own people again and come back to his well-built house and his own country, then may he come late, and in bad case, having lost all his companions, in someone else's ship, and may he find trouble waiting in his household. That is precisely what comes to pass. By announcing his name, Odysseus supplies the means of his own punishment. Every wandering, every shipwreck, every year of grief that follows in this poem flows from the Cyclops' curse. The name Demodocus' song had just given back to him is the same name he throws away over the stern of his ship. It is the one possession Odysseus cannot bear to travel without, and the moment he lets a stranger hear it, it becomes a weapon aimed at Ithaca. Everything that happens to him from here on is the price of being remembered.